So now I wanted to go over a little bit in shot compositions that we're going to be using with different cameras and talk a little bit about the different types of shots that are going to go into it. So when we're looking at shot compositions, this is basically going to be how you frame the image inside of your camera. If you're going to do like an off-center, or if you're going to be having overlay of graphics, you're going to need to adjust the type of shots that you use. So one of the things that's going to help you out with this is what's known as the Viewfinder. And this is a small monitor that's either going to be on the side of the camera, as you can kind of see over here, or it may be an additional monitor that's mounted on the top. So when we're dealing with studio shots, we're going to tend to be looking at the viewfinder that's going to be mounted on the top of the camera. Now, if we're going to be talking about the ENG cameras, most of these are going to have a small portable monitor to give you the ability to see what the camera sees. And so when you do that, you can better frame up your shot. Now, one of the things that's going to help you as a guide for your shot is what's called the safe zone. So when we're dealing with looking at video, not the entire image of what's recorded makes it into the final product. If it's going to be something that's streamed or something that's broadcast over the air, there tends to be a part of the image that's going to get cut off. And to be safe, that outside border is going to take up about 10%. So if you want to guarantee that something is going to fit into your screen, make sure that it's going to fall within the safe zone. And if you look at a lot of your viewfinders, there's going to be some markings that are going to kind of go along the inside like a box to kind of help you set up your shot. So the safe zone is going to be a valuable tool for when you get shots that you're going to set up for your camera. So a lot of times, this is one of our studio cameras, and I can see that up here in the corners, I have these little black markers. And with the markers, I can see what's inside the safe zone and what's outside the safe zone. And this is the raw image that's getting recorded. Now, in the bottom right corner, I have a shot of where I'm looking at a television of what's being broadcast out from the camera. So when I look in the camera, I can see that there's these little two black monitors over on the left and over on the right. And this is a tool that the anchor sitting on the screen wall can look to their sides and see what information or what video is being played. But due to that information being cut off of the 10%, when you look at the television, you can kind of see that those monitors have disappeared. So whenever you're shooting video, make sure what you're shooting is not going to be at the very top or the very bottom or the very edges. Otherwise, there is a good chance that that's going to get cut off. And for that reason, safe zones are really going to help you out. So looking at a couple of examples of camera shots and angles that were shot outside the safe zone. So when I look at this one in the upper left, I can see that the top of this person's head has been cut off. Likewise with the person in the bottom, their camera had set them up so that the top of their heads were at the top of the screen. They forgot to allocate that 10%. Now on the right side of my production switcher, I have actually a double safe zone. So this outside box is known as a traditional safe zone. The one that's on the inside is known as a text safe zone. So if I'm going to have text I want to make sure people see, I'm going to make sure that that text is going to be inside that inner box. That way it's not bunched up against the edge of the screen. And when I look at this screen, I can see that the top of his head is touching the top of this safe zone. When I look at the program, that's going to give me plenty of room above his head to send out wherever we need to send it out. If it's going to be broadcast over cable, over satellite, if it's going to get captured, I know that we're not going to lose part of his head because he is within that safe zone area. Now, once you kind of have, once you know where the borders of your camera are, there's different types of shots we're going to be using in either production or news to get the shot that you want. And so a wide variety of these things are going to come from some basic shots with some minor modifications. So the first shot that we look at is what's known as a tight shot or a centered shot. It can also be used as a close-up. So when I look at this screen, I can see my anchor is kind of in the middle. There's some equal space on both the left and the right. She has plenty of room above her head. And with her being centered, she is looking straight at the camera. So this is a good shot for when you have a person that wants to direct the audience or wants to directly address the people at home or viewing the audience. For that, you're going to have a tight shot and you're going to have it centered because as they're looking at you, there's a balance and a symmetry going to the entire shot. Now, another type of shot is what's known as a key shot or an over-the-shoulder shot, abbreviated as an OTS. And what this shot means is that we have the anchor that's moved off to the side of the screen, as you can see behind me, and I will disappear for a moment, that when we have our anchor set up in the studio, the camera allocates a bunch of empty space for the anchor to display a graphic. So in the bottom, I have my anchor with an empty space. Likewise, up top, I have the same shot composition for the other anchor, but the final result is our switcher has been able to add a graphic on top of it. And so this is why it's called over the shoulder, because most of these graphics do appear over the anchor shoulder. Now, one thing to consider, that some of these graphics may not be superimposed over the anchor in post-production or downstream of what the camera sees. If I look at this anchor that's on the left, I can see that she is standing in front of a bank of monitors, and those monitors are providing an imagery to coincide with the story. Now for this shot, my anchor and the camera are set up in the same fashion as the other ones. The anchor is offset to the right to allocate room for a graphic. The only difference is this graphic is being produced in a television behind her that's a part of the set. For the other two anchors, this graphic is superimposed, so they cannot see it in the studio. The camera operators will probably not be able to see it, but people at home and the director will be able to see it in the booth. Whereas with sports, they can see the graphics behind the anchor, and they can set that up. But both of these shots are going to be called a key shot or an OTS, for an over the shoulder. Now, another type of shot that's used is what's called a toss shot. So during a television newscast, we have different segments of the show that have a common theme, whether those themes are all of our news stories, our sports stories, or weather stories, or even something else like entertainment or information. We want to transition from one set of stories to the other. Now, some ways that we can do it is by an animated graphic that says, now here's weather, or taking a look at news from across the nation, around the world, here's our global news. One of the other aspects that can be used is what's known as a toss shot. And a toss shot is basically where one or two of the anchors take the attention of the types of stories they are, and they sort of like toss it over to the next person who's going to take the show and go along with the theme that they have. So what I have in our shot here on the left, we have what's called a weather toss. So our two anchors are talking to our weather anchor, and so they're beginning the weather segment by maybe addressing something they've noticed in the weather. Maybe it's been raining the last couple of days. Will that rain continue? And they'll talk to the weather anchor about that. And the weather anchor will then pick up where they left off and says, you know what? It is going to rain, but I'll tell you how long it's going to happen after we look at some graphics, some maps, and the weather forecast. Likewise, here's another type of toss on the right, where sports is finished doing their collection of stories, and they're now going to take the attention and toss it back to the two anchors. And at this point, sports may do like a quick recap. So they may say, and taking a look at sports, as you can see, the men's basketball did really good. The women's basketball had a little trouble, but hopefully they'll come back the next game. And we're getting ready for baseball, and they can't wait to get started. And the two news anchors will kind of finish that train of thought, and they'll say, like, that sounds really good. Can't wait to see if the women's basketball team are going to pick up and how it goes. And then they'll just transition into the next segment, if it's like news, sports, or weather. So when we're looking at a toss shot, this is sort of a medium shot that's going to have room just around the anchors. There's a little bit of space behind the sports, a little bit of space behind the news. Or if I'm looking at the weather toss, again, there's a little bit of space behind the news anchor and a little bit of space behind the weather anchor. And it is possible that not all parts of the human body, you want to set up so that they're not just cutting off the back of someone's shoulders, that there's going to be some space around them for the anchors to kind of move around and fit into the screen. Now, another type of shot that you'll see in news stories is what's known as the stand-up. And the stand-up is when the reporter, or the person who's narrating the story, directly addresses the audience. And they may use a stand-up either to transition from one part of the story into the other, or to provide some extra details or information. And with the stand-up, this is usually going to be a shot that's mostly going to be centered, unless there's some activity going on that might offset the image. And with the stand-up, you're going to have your reporter talking to the camera and addressing them. So it may be someone standing center screen at the location of where the story is taking. In the case of this story in the upper left, this was a story about a lake that had lost all of its water, so the reporter decided to stand in the empty, muddy part of the lake. In this bottom one, our reporter's talking about a fundraiser where people will accept money to have a pie pushed into their face. And so that gives that's a fun little angle for a fundraiser. And in this stand-up, the reporter has a pie in her face, and as she finishes talking about what she needs to, she actually participates by pushing the pie into the participant. But in all these cases of the stand-up, your shot is pretty much going to be your anchors in the center, much like a centered shot, and they're going to be directly looking at and addressing the audience. Now, whenever we have a news story, there's always going to be a person that's going to be interviewed. And this person is going to be a person of authority or knowledge on what the topic at hand or for the story is. And when we're dealing with an interview, usually the reporter is standing next to the camera and they are asking the questions. And so when you have an interview shot, your interview subject is not looking at the home audience. They're not looking at the camera. They're looking at the reporter who is standing offset of the camera. And when we set up an interview shot, we want to have a lot of room in front of the anchor. And this is what's called nose room. So you can kind of see there's a lot of space in front of their face, and there's a little bit of space behind them. Likewise, with this other interview shot, you have a lot of space in front of the interview subject, but there's not much space behind them because this is an interview shot. And you can also see, again, they're not looking directly at the audience. They're looking off camera and they're addressing their answers to the reporter. So by having an interview shot, you're able to differentiate when the information is being provided to the reporter as they relate to the audience, or when that information is being sent directly to the viewers at home. So this is a good example of an interview shot where the person has a little bit of room behind them, they've got plenty of room up above them, and they've got plenty of room in front of them. The only thing I would comment that this is not a good interview shot is that the person is directly looking at the camera. You would want them looking off to the side for where the reporter is going to be standing. Now, for a centered shot, this is also not a good shot because this person is, in fact, looking at the reporter. And because of that, you want to move the camera a little bit over so that they have more room in front of them and less room behind them. Now, if they were directly addressing the audience and looking straight at the camera, that would be fine. But for an interview, this is a bad format because it kind of just breaks the symmetry and the balance of the shot off. And I'll talk a little bit about that more coming up in the next video or two. So another thing to consider when you're getting an interview with a subject is you want your camera even with their eyes. You don't want it too far above them because you're going to be looking down on the top of their head. Or you don't want it too far below their eye level because it's going to start looking up into their nose. So having it too high above them or below them is not good. You want to make sure that the camera is set up so that it is kind of in line with their face. So when they're getting interviewed, you have a good shot of their head. So in this case, this is a pretty good interview shot because he's got a little bit of space behind him, plenty of room in front of him, and a little bit of space above his head. So one other thing is, even if you have your camera set up for an interview and you have it at eye level, you want to make sure that the person that you're interviewing is also looking at the same eye level as the camera. So you want to make sure that in this case, this person's sitting down and my reporter was standing up. So the interview subject is having to look up, and that gives them an awkward or an unusual direction of that they're looking into. So if your interview subject decides that they want to sit down, and you have the camera set for eye level, grab a chair and sit across from them. That way, instead of looking up, you're going to have them looking directly at the camera. Now, another type of shot that we have that can also be very well used in storytelling is what's called extreme close-up. And with this, you are taking the focus or the attention of what you want to show your audience and having it maximized to take up as much room of the screen as possible. In this upper left corner, I have a picture that you can see the reflection of someone in this person's glasses. And this is something that you probably wouldn't see from a wider shot. And in the case of the bottom picture, this is from a movie called Psycho. And this shot was used to help tell a story in many different cutaways and snapshots. But in the end, this achieved the desired effect, and it actually wound up scaring a lot of moviegoers because they'd never seen anything like this. And so for storytelling, it was a very powerful storytelling shot. And so that's just a brief overview of kind of shot composition and what goes into looking at the different types of setups that your camera is going to need. So depending on what you're going to have, if your subject is talking directly to the audience like I am, you're going to want them relatively in the center of your shot. If your subject matter is going to be doing an interview, you want to set the camera up, have it eye level, and then stand next to your camera so that when they do the interview, you can kind of see that they're looking off to the side of the screen. So with shot composition and other types are what we're going to be using in newscasts. Things like centered, over the shoulder, a toss shot. Those are going to be common shots that you're going to be seeing used in television productions, even in studios. Things like documentaries, we're also going to be using this type of shot setup. So we'll talk a little bit more about setting up shot compositions and a couple of rules